The translator's name was Kira, and she had spent 7 years learning the clicking, whistling language of the Veltar Empire. 7 years of cramped study chambers aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony. 7 years of practicing throat clicks until her voice was raw. 7 years preparing for humanity's first formal contact with an alien civilization. She stood now in the crystalline chamber of the Veltar High Council, her hands trembling as she faced the assembled representatives of 43 worlds. Each Veltar stood nearly 3 meters tall, their translucent skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions. The chamber itself seemed alive, walls rippling with organic architecture that breathed softly in the filtered starlight. Ambassador Reed stepped forward, his weathered face calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Behind him, Captain Morris and the rest of the human delegation waited in perfect formation. The weight of 5 billion human lives pressed down on Kira's shoulders. This translation could determine whether humanity joined the galactic community or remained isolated on their small blue world. High Counselor Vexana approached, her skin cycling through deep purples and blues. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, each syllable a carefully modulated tone that carried layers of meaning. Kira listened intently, her neural implant recording every nuance for analysis. "Welcome, beings of the third world from Sol," Vexana intoned. "We have observed your species with great interest. Your expansion into your local star system shows promise, but we must understand your true nature before we can consider full membership in our alliance." Kira translated smoothly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Ambassador Reed nodded and gestured for her to continue with their prepared response. "We come in peace," Reed said, "seeking friendship and mutual understanding. Humanity values cooperation, growth, and the protection of all sentient life." As Kira began translating, she stumbled over one word. In the human language, protection carried connotations of guardianship, defense, and care. But in Veltar, the closest equivalent was Daxal, a term that could mean protection, but also domination, control, or conquest, depending on the linguist. Subtle throat modulations that accompanied it. In her nervousness, Kira's throat clicked too sharply on the second syllable. The meaning shifted. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The reaction was immediate. Vexana's skin flashed brilliant red, and a low harmonic rumble filled the chamber as the other Veltar began their own agitated color displays. Kira felt the change in the room like a physical blow. The soft breathing of the walls became rapid, almost panicked. "You speak of conquest," Vexana said, her voice now sharp as breaking glass. "You come with words of peace but reveal your true intentions. Your species seeks to dominate all sentient life." "No," Kira stepped forward, her hands raised. "There's been a mistake." "I misspoke," but Ambassador Reed was already moving, his training taking over as he saw the situation deteriorating. "What did you tell them?" he demanded. The Veltar were backing away now, their colors shifting to patterns Kira recognized as extreme fear and aggression. Security barriers began emerging from the living walls, and she could hear the distant sound of alert harmonics echoing through the structure. I said we value the conquest of all sentient life," Kira whispered, the horror of her mistake crashing over her like a wave. "I clicked wrong. One sound, and I changed everything." The chamber erupted in chaos as Veltar guards surged forward, their bioluminescent weapons charging with deadly light. 3 days after the failed first contact, the Veltar fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system. 217 ships, each the size of a small moon, their organic hulls bristling with bioengineered weapons that could crack planets. Like eggs. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship, defiant, watching the impossible sight unfold on her tactical displays. She had commanded battles in the asteroid belt, fought pirates in the outer colonies, but nothing had prepared her for this. The alien vessels moved with a fluid grace that spoke of living technology, their formations shifting like schools of deep-sea creatures. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Tom Bradley called out, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. It's in dozens of languages. They must have spent the last 3 days analyzing our broadcasts." The main screen flickered and the image of High Counselor Vexana appeared. Her translucent skin no longer showed the beautiful patterns Elena had seen in the archived footage from the diplomatic mission. Now her entire body pulsed with angry red veins, and her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "People of Earth," Vexana began, her words carefully pronounced in accented English, "your ambassador has revealed your true nature. You see all sentient life as something to be conquered, dominated, enslaved. The Veltar Empire has stood for 10,000 years against such threats. We will not allow another predator species to spread across the galaxy." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, but she could see the futility in their movements. Earth's entire space navy consisted of 42 ships, most of them designed for patrol and rescue operations. They had kinetic weapons, nuclear missiles, and the latest plasma cannons technology that had seemed advanced when used against human pirates and rogue asteroids. Against the Veltar fleet, they were insects challenging a hurricane. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth Defense Force," she broadcast on all frequencies. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We are not conquerors. We never intended—" "Silence!" Vexana's image flared brighter. "We have studied your history, humans. Your species has a pattern of expansion, of taking what belongs to others. Your own records show centuries of warfare, colonization, and oppression. Your words in our sacred chamber were not a mistake, they were truth." The transmission cut off, and Elena watched in horrified fascination as the Veltar fleet began to move. Their ships spread out in a perfect sphere around the solar system, cutting off any possibility of escape. Then, smaller craft began detaching from the mother ship's sleek, predatory things that moved toward the inner planets with deadly purpose. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun reported from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are detecting energy buildups across their fleet. Whatever those weapons are, they're charging for a massive coordinated strike." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter back on Earth, probably sitting in her university quantum physics class, unaware that her world was about to end. When she opened them again, her voice was steady and clear. "All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. I'm promoting myself, situation warrants it. Battle stations. We might not be able to win this fight, but we're going to show them what humans do when our backs are against the wall." The response was immediate. Across the fleet, human ships that had never been designed for this level of combat began moving into defensive positions. They were outnumbered 5-1 by ships that outclassed them in every category, but Elena saw something else in their movements, something the Veltar hadn't expected. They weren't running. The first wave of Veltar attack craft reached the outer defense perimeter just as the human ships finished their formations. Elena watched the tactical display as 42 points of light faced down over 1,000 enemy contacts. The mathematics were simple and brutal. It would be a massacre. "All ships," she broadcast, "remember what we're fighting for. Our families, our world, our future. Make every shot count." The space around Jupiter erupted in fire and death as the two fleets collided. Ambassador Reed sat in the emergency bunker beneath Geneva, watching the battle unfold on screens that flickered with static from the electromagnetic interference of dying ships. Each flash of light in the darkness above Earth represented human lives lost, dreams cut short, futures that would never be. Kira sat beside him, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't spoken since they'd been evacuated from the diplomatic vessel 3 days ago, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. The weight of her mistake pressed down on her like a physical thing, crushing her beneath the knowledge that her mispronunciation had doomed her entire species. 17 ships left, General Martinez reported from across the bunker's command center. His voice was steady, professional, but Reed could see the grief in the older man's eyes. Admiral Vasquez is requesting permission to fall back to the inner system defense grid. Reed nodded, though his attention was fixed on the linguistic analysis, scrolling across his personal tablet. For 3 days, teams of xenolinguists had been working around the clock, trying to understand exactly what had gone wrong in that crystalline chamber. The answer, when it came, was both simple and devastating. "It's incredible," Dr. Lisa Park said as she approached their table. The lead xenolinguist looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her eyes red from staring at screens. One phoneme, one single sound, and the entire meaning changed. In Veltar, the difference between protect and conquer is a throat click that lasts 0.03 seconds. Kira's click lasted 0.05 seconds. 0.02 of a second, Reed said quietly. "That's what this war comes down to." "It's more than that," Dr. Park continued, settling into a chair across from them. "I've been analyzing their historical records, the ones they broadcast during their ultimatum. The Veltar Empire has faced 3 previous conqueror species in their 10,000-year history. Each time, they interpreted initial peaceful contact as deception and launched preemptive strikes." Reed looked up from his tablet. "You're saying they have a pattern of misunderstanding?" "I'm saying they're traumatized," Dr. Park replied. "Their entire civilization is built around the fear of being conquered. When Kira accidentally used their word for conquest, it confirmed their worst fears about us. They're not evil, they're terrified." On the main display, another cluster of human ships winked out of existence as Veltar bioweapons tore through their hulls. The defense of Mars had lasted 6 hours. The asteroid belt mining stations had been silent for 2 days. Now only Earth remained, protected by the scattered remnants of humanity's space forces and the orbital defense platforms that had never been tested against weapons of this magnitude. Kira finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How many, Kira?" Reed began. "How many have died because of me?" Reed looked at the casualty reports on his tablet, then set it aside. "It doesn't matter." "Doesn't matter?" Kira's voice cracked. 3 million people on Mars. 500,000 in the asteroid belt. The fleet casualties. "It doesn't matter," Reed repeated, his voice firm but gentle, "because you're going to help us fix this." General Martinez approached their table, his face grim. "Mr. Ambassador, we've got incoming. The Veltar main fleet is moving toward Earth. Admiral Vasquez estimates we have maybe 8 hours before they reach optimal firing position." Reed stood, his decision crystallizing in his mind. "General, I need you to patch me through to the Veltar fleet, all channels, all frequencies." "Sir, they're not taking our communications." "Then we'll make them listen," Reed said. "Dr. Park, how quickly can you and Kira prepare a message in perfect Veltar? No mistakes, no room for misinterpretation?" Dr. Park glanced at Kira, who was staring at Reed with something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Give us 2 hours." "You have 1, Reed replied. "Because I'm going to do something that will either save our species or get us all killed faster." He turned to General Martinez. "I need a ship. Something fast enough to reach their fleet before they fire on Earth." "Sir, that's suicide. Their bioweapons will tear apart anything we send. Not if I'm flying a white flag, Reed said. Not if I'm coming to surrender. The bunker fell silent except for the distant rumble of orbital defense platforms adjusting their positions above. Reed looked around at the faces of humanity's last command center soldiers, scientists, diplomats, and translators, all united in their desperate hope. One word started this war, he said. Maybe the right words can end it. The shuttle messenger was the fastest ship in Earth's remaining fleet, a diplomatic courier vessel designed for speed rather than combat. As it streaked toward the Veltar Armada, its hull gleaming with the white and blue symbols of peaceful intent, Captain Jake Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was flying his own coffin toward an alien graveyard in the passenger compartment. Behind him, Ambassador Reed sat with Kira and Dr. Park, their voices barely audible over the hum of the engines as they practiced their desperate message one final time. Reed had insisted on making the approach himself, despite knowing that it would likely be the last thing he ever did. 3 minutes to intercept, Morrison called over his shoulder. Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildups across their fleet. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Reed nodded and activated the ship's communication array. The message they had crafted was only 90 seconds long, but those 90 seconds represented humanity's only hope of survival. Kira's hands trembled as she began to speak in the clicking, whistling language of the Veltar. Her pronunciation now perfect after 3 days of intensive practice. The message was simple. They were requesting formal surrender protocols under Veltar law, and they claimed the right to explain their crime before accepting punishment. For 10 seconds, there was no response. Then the alien fleet began to move, their massive ships adjusting position with fluid grace. Morrison watched his instruments as dozens of bioweapons locked onto their tiny shuttle, any one of which could vaporize them in an instant. Incoming transmission, Morrison announced, his voice tight with suppressed fear. High Counselor Vexana's image appeared on their main screen, her translucent skin still pulsing with angry red patterns. But Reed noticed something else in her bioluminescent display: curiosity, perhaps even confusion. Human vessel, Vexana said in heavily accented English. You approach our fleet under surrender protocols. This is unexpected. Your species has SHOWN, no indication of accepting defeat. Reed stepped forward, knowing that everything depended on the next few moments. High Counselor, I am Ambassador Reed of Earth. I come to offer our formal surrender, but I invoke the right of Teleson, the right to explain our crime before accepting judgment. Vexana's skin patterns shifted, cycling through what Dr. Park had identified as surprise and deep consideration. The concept of Teleson was ancient in Veltar culture, a sacred right that even the worst criminals could claim before their execution. You know our laws, Vexana said slowly. How is this possible? Because we spent 7 years learning your language and culture, Reed replied. 7 years preparing for peaceful contact. 7 years hoping to find friends among the stars. The alien fleet had stopped moving, their weapons still charged but no longer tracking the human shuttle. Reed could see the internal struggle playing out in Vexana's bioluminescent patterns, the collision between her fear of conquest and her species' sacred commitment to justice. You may board our vessel, Vexana said finally. You will be granted Telesan, though I warn you that it will only delay your execution, not prevent it. 20 minutes later, Reed found himself once again in a crystalline chamber aboard a Veltar ship. This time, however, the organic walls pulsed with muted colors, and only High Counselor Vexana was present, along with 2 other Veltar officials, whose skin patterns suggested they were judges or legal advisors. Speak, Vexana commanded. Explain why your species believes it has the right to conquer all sentient life. Reed took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the fate of 5 billion human souls. High Counselor, we never said we wanted to conquer anyone. There was a translation error. Vexana's skin flashed brilliant red. Do not insult our intelligence with lies, human. We heard your words clearly. You heard our translator make a mistake. Reed replied calmly. Kira, please repeat exactly what you said 3 days ago. Kira stepped forward, her voice shaking as she reproduced the fatal mispronunciation. The effect on the Veltar officials was immediate. Their skin patterns shifted to what Reed recognized as shocked realization. Now, Reed continued, please, tell them what you meant to say. This time, Kira's pronunciation was perfect, her throat clicks precise and controlled. The word that emerged was clearly different from the first, carrying entirely different connotations. Vexana stared at them for a long moment, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been hope. You claim this was an error? One phoneme, Reed said quietly, 0.02 of a second. That's the difference between peace and war. The ceasefire came 18 hours after Reed's desperate mission, but by then, the damage was already done. 4 million humans were dead. Their ships and stations reduced to expanding clouds of debris that would drift through the solar system for centuries. The Veltar had lost fewer than 300 crew members, but Reed could see in High Counselor Vexana's bioluminescent patterns that each death weighed heavily on her. They sat now in a proper diplomatic chamber, this one aboard the human. Station New Geneva, hastily retrofitted to accommodate Veltar physiology. The organic breathing walls had been replaced with adaptable polymer surfaces that could shift color and texture in response to the aliens' emotional states. It was a compromise that both species could accept. The translation error has been verified by our linguistic experts, Vexana announced to the assembled council. Her skin showed patterns of deep regret and formal acknowledgement. The humans did not declare their intention to conquer. They spoke of protection, guardianship of life, not domination of it. Reed watched as the other Veltar officials processed this information, their skin patterns shifting through complex emotional displays. Some showed anger at the mistake, others curiosity about human nature, and a few displayed what appeared to be shame. However, Vexana continued, this raises questions about your species that we must address. Your history shows a pattern of territorial expansion and conflict. How do we know that protection will not become conquest given time? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Reed had spent the last day preparing for this moment, studying not just Veltar law but their deepest cultural values. He stood slowly, his movements careful and respectful. High Counselor, may I tell you about a human named Jake Morrison? Vexana's patterns showed mild confusion. The pilot of your diplomatic vessel? 3 days ago, Captain Morrison was scheduled to take his daughter to see the Jupiter mining stations, Reed continued. It was going to be her first trip off Earth, a graduation present. Instead, he flew into the middle of your fleet, knowing he probably wouldn't survive, because he believed that peace was worth the risk. Reed activated a holographic display showing the battle statistics from the defense of Earth. We lost 41 ships and over 300,000 military personnel in the fighting. Every single one of them could have fled to the outer colonies or hidden in the asteroid belt. Instead, they stayed and fought to protect Earth, not to conquer it, but to defend it. The Veltar officials leaned forward, their skin patterns showing intense interest. This is what humans do, Reed said, his voice growing stronger. When something we love is threatened, we don't run, we don't surrender. We stand and fight, even when the odds are impossible. Not because we want to conquer others, but because we want to protect what matters to us. Vexana's skin had shifted to deep blue patterns that Dr. Park had identified as profound contemplation. You fought knowing you could not win? We fought because we had to, Reed replied. Because that's what you do when your family is in danger. And every sentient being in this galaxy is part of our family now, whether they know it or not. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the environmental systems. Reed could See the Veltar officials exchanging complex patterns of bioluminescent communication, their emotions playing out in real time across their translucent skin. Finally, Vexana spoke. In 10,000 years of galactic civilization, we have encountered species that sought to conquer, species that sought to hide, and species that sought only to trade. We have never encountered a species that would die to protect strangers. She paused, her patterns shifting to something Reed had never seen before, a combination of respect, wonder, and what might have been the Veltar equivalent of a smile. Perhaps, Vexana said slowly, the translation error was not entirely a mistake. Perhaps it revealed something true about humans, not that you seek to conquer life, but that you would fight to protect it. This is ... This is not what we expected. Reed felt the tension in the chamber begin to shift, like a storm cloud finally releasing its burden of rain. High Counselor, humanity seeks only to join the galactic community as equals. We want to learn, to grow, to help protect the peace that your empire has maintained for 10,000 years. And if that peace is threatened? If some species does seek conquest? Reed thought of Captain Morrison, of Admiral Vasquez, of the hundreds of thousands who had died defending Earth from what they believed was an extinction-level threat. Then you'll have humans standing beside you, he said simply. Because that's what family does. Vexana's skin erupted in brilliant patterns of gold and silver, the Veltar expression of joy and acceptance. Around the chamber, the other officials began displaying similar patterns, their fears giving way to something that looked remarkably like hope. One word nearly destroyed both our species, Vexana said. Perhaps it is fitting that other words will unite us. As the formal negotiations began, Reed thought about Kira, who had chosen to remain on Earth to establish a new translation protocol that would prevent such misunderstandings in the future. Her mistake had cost millions of lives, but her dedication to ensuring it never happened again had become the foundation of a new era of galactic diplomacy. Sometimes, Reed realized the greatest victories came from the deepest failures. And sometimes, the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with words spoken correctly at exactly the right moment, by people brave enough to believe in a better future. The stars, it seemed, had been waiting for humanity after all.